Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Stores, and this is Mattsplaining. Today, I have a guest on who is very passionate about their subject. Could you please introduce yourself and let me know what you're an expert in?
Hi, I'm Tristan Miller, and I guess I'm an expert in podcasting. I certainly have done it enough.
Okay, my understanding of podcasting is that it is an art form.
Oh, boy.
Yes, podcasting is an art form where usually men gather
hmm
together because they don't feel comfortable just hanging out normally. And they use it as an excuse to catch up about like what's going on in their life. Sometimes there'll be like a concept that brings things together so that they can hang out under the guise of like they're doing a mystery investigation of
hmm
a cold case or something, but really it's just two guys that don't know how to hang out socially outside of like having a little chat. Then there are some other ones that are a little bit more investigative. It's NPR's budget was a little too big and a little too bloated, and they're like, you know what, we should have more shows. What if we just had more shows, more people talking, more people doing these investigations? And so
hmm
that's, really where a lot of it kind of developed from. And then there are the people that are legitimately hyper fixated on certain issues, and they're like, you know what, let's go and really focus on this
Boy.
thing and let other people know about how hyperfixated are, and then like you create a community based on that because people are like, oh, I too am hyperfixated on money. Probably, I don't know, there's probably a lot of money podcasts, and on murder probably too, a lot of hyperfixation there. Hopefully there's hyperfixation on like kinder things, but that's a good portion of podcasting, I would say. I
Maybe, for example, American singer-songwriter Randy Newman, pretty positive force there.
Yes, Randy Newman, pretty positive force. A lot
Yeah.
of positivity coming from his music. Then there are the fandoms of podcasts. People that it's not like a very public display of a fandom. There's not, I mean, I guess you can get merchandise, but it's not as prevalent merchandising. You don't really have a lot of sports teams level
Mm,
podcasts
mm.
where it's like, oh, they're wearing that shade of red. That must refer to such and such podcast or such and such racist sports team. So, yeah, that's my basic understanding of podcasts. I think that it's a good thing overall for society. I think that we should have more of them. I think that, when you really, if it hasn't happened yet, I think that there should be an instance where kids are learning to speak and they have a podcast tracking it, their progress of like learning how to speak, whether it's a new language or, just like a toddler as the main guest every week, um, which I think would be captivating.
Yeah, yeah, I think so as well.
Yeah. So, about how correct was my analysis
Can I
there?
can I tell you, you're like 85% correct.
Okay.
You're not wrong. The thing is, Matthew, you're not wrong about a lot of it, but you're not necessarily fully right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
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 I would say from the jump, the whole notion of like mostly it's an excuse to talk to friends, and I think you said something very astute about particularly American masculinity of like, yeah, unless there's an activity going on, men have no idea how to just sit in a room and talk.
Right.
And I think, yeah, you're absolutely correct on that. And, I would argue that those are some of probably least valuable podcasts. Also, I would never in my whole life, and you probably heard me say, oh boy, call podcasts an art. That's like, I would even okay, even something as high quality as something coming from example like NPR or, you know, some other podcast network, it's you get in kind of like weird sort of situations when you have like a radio drama style podcast, but I would still argue that that's like entertainment rather than art per se. I feel like a
Hmm.
lot of people who are fans of, like, for example, the Adventure Zone, which is a narrative D&D podcast, would be like, "Oh no, this is definitely art." And I'm like, "Well, it's still, I don't know, improvised, and I don't know. It's still meant to be entertaining more than anything else, in
Hmm.
my opinion." However, I would never. Oh boy, the audacity for you to. It's brave of you, really. You're making waves here, Matt, and I
That's what we're here
appreciate that.
for.
Yeah, I briefly, my soul left my body when I heard that, because I would say this podcast in and of itself, it's a portmanteau of iPod and
Hmm.
broadcast. So it makes me think of initially like some sort of, like, it was conceived initially of like a radio substitute,
Hmm.
but now things have gotten out of hand. It really has, because there are so many specialized versions of it, as you did note, of like hyperfixated, of like that. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Someone who has needs to get something out of their system finds like-minded people, and it's for good or ill. Looking at you, Red Scare and Come Town, R.I.P. But yeah, I would say that. I would also, the notion that NPR's budget was bloated is frankly absurd. I got to tell you, that's probably the 15% you were most wrong on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I just feel that sometimes they have like a really good pledge drive. Then very shortly after that pledge drive, they have a new show. And it's like, I don't know. Did they have this before? Did they were like, oh hey, we got an extra couple $1,000. You want to do a deep dive into how t-shirts are made?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's also, I don't think NPR, I would argue, has ever had a good pledge drive. I think the desperation in all those people's eyes as they're like, please buy a tote bag for the love of God, is, I mean, at least emotionally, it's gotta not be good. But yeah, I could respect that analysis. I also feel like podcasts are so dirt cheap to make, right?
Right.
Get anyone with, a Rode microphone in their closet and you can make these things. So I feel like it's not necessarily a budget thing of like, I feel like what happens is they probably have a pledge drive and then they hire a couple of interns, and that's where they come from. So I guess, like, transitive property and all of that. As far as fandom goes, I feel like you're right in as much as there's not like a lot of merch, unless you're going to like something like PodCon, RIP,
Right.
or, a comic convention or something like that. But I would argue that in online spaces, people telegraph that they are a part of a certain podcast fandom, like Welcome to Night Vale, or again, the Adventure Zones, or this sort of thing. And you can kind of pick up of like, oh, this person probably would like this. Like if they have an anime avatar, they're probably a fan of racism, or
Mm.
what or what have you. What's a better example than just racism? I mean, like, or like you see certain people and you're like, oh, you listen to This American Life still, or what have you.
Right. They have glasses, they have an ascot, they a series of ascots, they perhaps have a turtleneck, tweed. I would
Hmm.
be like, oh, this person, decent likelihood that they listen to This American Life.
So what you're telling me is you listen to This
Yeah,
American
I
Life.
do listen to This American Life. If it comes on, I'm like, oh, sweet, This American Life. I'm going to listen
Mhm.
to one story and then go to sleep, probably. But
Sure.
yeah, but
And I also will say this regarding podcasts. Like I said, initially it was like a substitute for radio, but now there's so many specialized podcasts that it's insane. That it's like everything that's happening with current media, in as much as like you have so much choice over what you consume in terms
mhm.
of, media, that like I would have never listened to Car Talk had it not just been on right before Prairie Home Companion on NPR.
Exactly. You and I very much alike in that respect.
Yeah, and but I enjoyed it, and I was so glad that I found out about it. Whereas like now, you really have to search something out, and this is me getting on my little soapbox of like I miss cable, I
Hmm.
miss radio because it exposes you to so many other things that normally you might not be privy to.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like radio is a little bit curated,
Mm,
and there's kind of a narrow box for a lot of people of like, oh, I'm not getting as much representation on the radio.
Mhm.
But, if you have, from the musician perspective, it's like, oh, we can't get our songs on the radio. Oh, we'll put them online. And then you get a
Mhm.
huge following online. That's great. But if you were to get on that radio, your distribution would be so substantially wider. And now it's like, oh, well, we've kind of just bought into the idea of there's not going to be a true communal source of, oh, this is the radio program that people listen to. This is the music that people are really, really popularized. You can really dive into those subsets.
Yeah, I think. Do you think it has something to do with the American viewpoint of like individual exceptionalism as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it plays on it quite a bit. I think that there's a dynamic of
Feel like I might have led us into the weeds with that one. I'm
a little
sorry.
bit. No, 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 don't. That's what this is for. This is to get into the weeds.
Mm.
And the fact we have 3 minutes left. But I think that there is a dynamic of like everybody thinking, oh, I have something to say. And,
Mhm.
I want to put it out there without like truly thinking anything
Sure.
through. Please see the first 5 minutes of this podcast.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is, I think, kind of the dynamic of like some people don't recognize what they're doing. And
Yeah, I
are,
think
yeah,
that's a lot of people. I feel like they don't think about their actions too much, and then they get a response specifically online, and they're like, "Oh no, this was a mistake. I don't like this at all."
how did I become a New
Yeah.
Zealander?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also fascinating regarding podcasting as much as like they're so homegrown, you can like really either make or break a career with them, and like it's so, or you can have like 10 people that love it and they can be you just give you $100 a month and then you're just set for expenses. Like it's so strange, this whole being online. But I feel like it's out of all the new media stuff, I think one of the most interesting things because it has become so specialized so quickly.
Right.
Within like, it started in 2006 and within, the 4 years prior by like 2010, we already had like, okay, we have rewatch podcasts. We have all of this rather than like, I feel like TV took a long time to figure out what the heck it was doing and still is like getting reinvented every 15 years,
Right.
Who
Whereas
knows what a podcast's going to be?
exactly. And I mean, it's highly adaptable and it's a very wonderful art form.
Oh God, I gonna yeet myself into the sun if you say that again. I I would also say what's interesting is with the advent of TikTok,
Hmm.
that video podcasts are now coming with like clips, and I'm like, this is just a talk show. We've just reverted to daytime television. What is happening?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's because we all have cameras and access to all this stuff and blah blah blah, democratization of being able to create media for good and ill.
Yeah.
You know, uh, did I do good? Did I do an
Yeah, you
okay
did.
job explaining?
I feel more confident in my
Yeah.
understanding of what a podcast is for sure. If
You-
people wanted to find out more about podcasts or more about you, where would they
Okay.
go?
For podcasts, I recommend going to hell because that's mostly where they live. I mean, no, I feel as though you can just go to Apple Podcasts. I mean, that's the original, that's the OG, and just put in the search bar. If you're on an Android, God bless you, go to Spotify, I guess. Also, save up some money and get a good phone.
Ooh, shots
Yeah,
taken.
listen, don't get me started about. I mean, I understand a lot of people are in a pinch, and Cricket Mobile or Boost Mobile. It's important that lower income people, or like maybe you just want the options. I guess I fully don't understand it. I say this having just tried for 15 minutes to get my Macintosh computer to work properly, so maybe I'm full of it. In any event, you can probably go to tristanjmiller.com. That's my website, or tristanjmiller1 on twitter.com. Let's see how long I'm there for. What with the news of its new owner, I might try to shift over to Tumblr and TikTok. It's all Tristan J. Miller. All
Tristan
the
J.
way up.
Miller.
Tristan J.
Fantastic.
Miller. Yep.
Well, thank you very
Oh,
much. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a podcast. I would be remiss.
Yeah, as somebody who's talked so at length about podcasts, you would think that you would probably plug your own podcast, but
That you've been on. It's called
yeah,
Focus Testing. A guest and I improvise a film premise based off of a random word. It's pretty fun. Haven't done an episode in a little bit because I've been busy, but when I do it, it's a good time. It's one of those podcasts that I don't edit, so what you see is what you get, and eventually it might get me in trouble. Thank you very much.
absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Tristan, for all of this information. I really appreciate it. My name's
Mhm.
Matt Stores, and this has been Mattsplaining.